continue with the narration of longitudinal thinking, I need to get back to what was termed as the medicine wheel, and you took a look at it. The significance of this is to show the value of circular thinking and to establish a simple proposition with you. And the proposition is, when you have the north and the south, east and the south and the west indicators with their characteristics, which you find here reproduced, north standing for wisdom, integration, sharing of ideas and views, east standing for anticipation, direction, vision and expanded perspective, and south standing for curiosity and innocence, west stands for conviction and self assurance, and north stands for integration, wisdom and sharing of ideas and views, coming back to the integration. So, the cycle is complete. In fact, as I shared with you, the entire cyclical effort can begin at any point, but conventionally it is supposed to begin here. Now, there are fillers between the beginning marked here and the subsequent stages. The fillers are new vision ideas, action and implementation. This links between east and south, that is between anticipation and curiosity. Then there is accept responsibility, how will it be done? A curiosity moves on to conviction, and conviction leads to making new ideas leadership, which results in wisdom, integration, sharing of new ideas, and the inner process of renewal continue cycling the wheel. Now, this is the medicine wheel, the therapeutic wheel. Cohen has established this about a decade and a half ago, closer perhaps to 2 decades, and incorporating the medicine wheel model into organizational learning, he went on to argue that first, learning needs to be done as a part of every performance. This is important. Every performance is a learning situation. He takes the entire debate beyond classroom learning and learning on the job to emphasize the self-feeding cycle of performance and learning. And every relationship within an organization is an instrument of learning. Why every relationship within an organization? Every relationship outside an organization would be an instrument of learning. Any relationship anywhere would be an instrument of learning. We not only learn from each other, we learn from the experience of interacting. Because we all realize that every individual is a unique individual. Every individual has his own unique responses, and within that response mechanism, he happens to have certain unique features which cause some learning to the person with whom he is interacting. The second is, we need to move from a linear view of learning to one that is circular or spiral, and this has been explained as stated earlier. Third, movement from cross sectional to longitudinal thinking. This is a very powerful transition which Cohen advocates. Move from cross sectional to longitudinal thinking. In other words, make thinking the penetrative instrument rather than the structure of reality being the framework of reference. Learning can occur on many levels and in different directions. The direction of learning need not necessarily be in sync with the intended direction, because learning has its own logic and not very often programmable. Fourth, our view of learning also needs to change from one that is compartmental to one that is integrative. This is very important. If you look at each discipline as a separate and autonomous in its own right, then you lose sight of the focused attention which it deserves, the focused impact which it is capable of making. This means that valuing wisdom rather than expertise is the essence of learning. Now, that is the proposition of David Cowan. One may have views on what he is saying. One may not be quite convinced of what he is saying, but what he is saying is a powerful argument for longitudinal thinking, which of course is rooted in a time framework of analysis, and that I have already explained is the essence of longitudinal perspective. But it is the outcome of those perspectives which is relevant to study of organizations and human resources. Now, Cowan's view of shifting from expertise to wisdom is an important one, because it is quite obvious that expertise is a passing process. It is quite obvious that expertise is subject specific and by definition time specific. Wisdom is the distillation of knowledge, expertise and whatever else goes along with it. Wisdom is the ability to filter experience, filter knowledge, give a perspective to human action, transcend time, become futuristic, and it is generally agreed that wisdom is the repository of all value additive action. To follow David Cowan's argument, let us look at some of the select arguments which he makes. He states, organizations must shift from their linear and compartmentalized view of learning to one that is circular, longitudinal and integrative. It has not a one-to-one relationship with learning. All organizations have a propensity to go in for compartmentalization, which inevitably can and does lead to turf wars. Marketing versus production, production versus human resources versus finance, and it has no track record of doing any good to organizational functioning. Therefore, this is a major shift in paradigm, where solutions of a lot of interdepartmental conflicts, it can be argued, are rooted in the thinking process of the organization. And if the thinking process of the organization is longitudinal, then it all gels together. Learning should be valuing wisdom rather than expertise, because expertise always operates within a narrow scope, and we have discussed that, and is only useful when one knows the context, whereas wisdom becomes more important when operating in uncertain contexts. Now, it is this uncertainty of the context which puts premium on longitudinal thinking. If the defining condition of the modern times is turbulence, then perhaps the answer lies in longitudinal thinking, where you derive a sense of direction for future action with the distillation of the experience of the past, but not limited to it. Structuring that experience, running it through a filter to distill the Badal elements to get the positive contents and project it with an anticipation of future situations. Obviously, David Cowan does not say all this, but no one author is the last word in a thought. I am trying to build upon what he has said and trying to apply it to organizational theory, some of which I have written on and is available in my book Organization Development Systems, which has a chapter on longitudinal thinking. According to Kaufman and Singe, we need action, but only when it comes from reflections that combines cognition, the body, the emotion and the spirit. Personally, I am a great protagonist of managerial action rooted in integration of all the components of human personality, which means obviously the body, the emotion, the intellect and the spirit. Kaufman and Singe have their thought, as captured from their writings in 1993, in the right direction, but somewhere they seem to have missed the value of intellect, a strange omission, but it does not take away from the basic credit which they deserve in establishing an integrated framework of managerial action covering body, emotion and spirit. And finally, the scope of expertise is becoming too narrow to operate effectively in rapid changing world. To repeat, the scope of expertise is becoming too narrow to operate effectively in a rapid changing world, whereas wisdom extends knowledge and helps us to choose both the means and the ends, as well as values and the game we want to play. Wisdom, therefore, is the foundation of strategy formulation, and any strategy which is not based in wisdom is bound to a sorry end. The theme, therefore, seems to be that longitudinal thinking and organizational planning require plan before planning. I will try to explain what is meant by plan before planning. Planning is the most important activity in which we engage, because the very nature of planning causes us to look forward and to consider options and goals. This statement is nothing new, but in the organizational context it acquires greater significance, because it is rooted in a very simple proposition of an objective driven situation. If the situation is objective driven, then one has to be absolutely clear that plan must follow. You can't get to the objective without planning, but the act of planning requires longitudinal thinking and reveals logical linkages. This assumption that planning requires longitudinal thinking is a very potent argument, because it puts at the center of the stage the time frame. Alas, a dimension which many management thinkers, in fact most management thinkers, have completely overlooked. The time frame is the core of longitudinal thinking, and management can't operate in frozen frames. It is not just a sequence, it is a flow. And therefore, to capture the essence of the flow, one needs to have the capacity to understand what can be termed as trend analysis. So, there is a need for plan before planning. We consider planning in various phases, and it involves at least two clusters of activities. The need to establish high level goals. Goals may be understood in terms of the creation of deliverables, and interestingly, the goals themselves may shift as the environment changes, and therefore, the deliverables may need to be revisited. If the deliverables need to be revisited, then it does havoc to any frozen picture. So, the significance of longitudinal thinking is putting everything in a flow, putting everything in a sequence, so that one has a situation where one is clear that the critical act is to keep pace, and wherever possible, besides keeping pace with, anticipate the environmental changes in a proactive manner and be prepared for it. Because it is very important, I might add soulful, to recognize that one cannot create a future. One can only be prepared for a future. So, how do you stay prepared for a future unless you have the capacity to anticipate a future, and a capacity which has to be dynamic and therefore, periodically open to revisits. So, the first activity which requires plan before planning, is to establish the high level goal. The second, and no prizes for guessing this, is the activity which requires an environment scan. The environment must be continuously scanned for what messages it has to do for of the individual, and the goal will have to keep adjusting to it, as I have just explained. Forces that facilitate the goal achievement would have to be strengthened. And make the resulting plan realistic. Identification of forces which help facilitate goal achievement is like marshalling resources, and then from the plan starts the planning which we have been talking about, and that requires a sound reality perception. For this sound reality perception, certain precursor steps may help, and let me show it to you. If you read it carefully, it will be easier for me to explain it. If you analyze the high level goals, most often you will find that this, having been done casually, has become a mishandled step. It is important not to have analysis of the high goal as a mishandled step. Therefore, convert the high level goals into operational goals, and it is this conversion process of high level goals to operational goals that make it a significant activity. High level goals become operational goals by imbuing in it specific characteristics which lead to action. Then develop strategies and tactics. For each operational goal, develop a unique strategy. In other words, all operational goals will have to be linked with strategies and tactics, not only as a collective, but in their own independent identity. And we have to apply tactics to achieve high level goals, develop the schedules and assign responsibilities. Alas, many planning processes restrict themselves to drawing up of the plan, which is why many plans do not succeed. The plans must convert themselves into schedules, and the schedules cannot be put into action unless responsibilities of each step are ascribed. Such activities in selected tactics also require ascription. The schedule for execution has to be recorded, and what is not stated here and you are supposed to recognize is that it needs to be monitored. It needs to be subjected to mid course correction if it is required, and after monitoring and mid course correction, a resource assessment has to be done to put it in a time frame, to figure out realistically whether what we are doing is a gainful activity or is doomed to be overtaken by changed environment and therefore not worth the effort which will be undertaken. Many people have felt that longitudinal assessment as a principle can be applied to many other places, especially to the grading system. Process efforts and participation, if made a tool of learning, will help in the practice of generating and developing ideas, thinking skills, problem solving skills, and dexterity skills. So, there is a line of thought whether learning can be measured on the basis of learning to think. Now, you need to pause there to absorb that. Learning is usually measured in terms of acquisition of knowledge, measurement of the skills, measurement of all the value addition in terms of competencies, capabilities that has taken place, but very rarely does it touch thinking, though it is plausible to argue that thinking itself is a capability. All I would like to add to that is that thinking is not just a capability. The particular level of thinking which human beings are capable of makes Homo sapiens extremely special in the chain of mammals, and many people, perhaps with good reason, believe that the Homo sapien is the highest point of evolution as of today, and of his many defining traits, one is his ability to think. Therefore, learning should reinforce thinking, and if I extend that further, it is plausible to argue that organizations which are capable of thinking will be the organizations which will survive, and therefore, the focus of learning should be to strengthen individual thinking and organizational thinking. I would like to leave it there, because this is not the best place to get into an analytical mode of strokes, which would go into questioning some of the paradigms, and yet at the same time, if the focus of learning is to think, persons watching this program, this presentation, this medium to add to their learning, should be gainful recipients if this process strengthens their ability to think, their ability to grow, and their ability therefore, by the same token, to contribute to organizational analysis and growth. There is an importance of longitudinal observations. And some people have reservations about it. And the importance of longitudinal observations would be many times more strengthened if longitudinal observations did not lead to copied products, which it needn't, because of the simple reason that because you learn from the past, you do not necessarily have to copy it. In fact, my addition to that thought has been that the heritage variable has to be decomposed, and I have already explained that. So, why should longitudinal thinking lead to copied products? That is an apprehension which is not well placed. People have also argued that longitudinal thinking would assume prior knowledge and therefore lead to coasting. To my way of thinking, it does not follow at all. The third argument made is it discourages originality. Well, this is broadly the repetition of the same argument, copied products discouraging originality. No, it does not. In fact, it strengthens the operational aspects in a way in which people realize that to be effective, you will have to be rooted in reality, and you will have to be rooted in an operational situation where originality is not only encouraged, but you realize that nothing else but originality works. So, this anxiety again seems to be misconstrued. And finally, the criticism that it reflects current learning can be tossed back and forth. So, the criticisms of the importance of longitudinal learning are well taken, they are valid, but like any criticism, they need to be thought through, they need to be rebutted, and they need not necessarily be seen as arguments which take away from the basic merits of longitudinal thinking and its ability to contribute to organization theory and practice. To start summing up, therefore, what does longitudinal assessment involve and what does it bring to the table? In terms of contribution to enhanced effectiveness of organizations, enhanced usage of human resources principles, and indeed, if it might be so argued, better results. Longitudinal assessment means assessment is for a period of time, because essence of longitudinal thinking is putting it in a time frame, which is where the historical method and the management method acquire a serious overlap. Remember what has been shared. History is study of change in time sequence, and management is planning and intervening for change in time sequence. Indeed, longitudinal assessment can also be applied to learning processes, where grades can be awarded according to learning between beginning and end points. So, the longitudinal framework has almost a universal analysis. And to carry this argument further, each student or learner can be compared to his or her own beginning point and the end point. So, what is the value addition? You do it in terms of a organization. How have the organization methods and values improved from the beginning of the intervention to the end of the intervention? Now, the assessment can be normative, the assessment can be longitudinal, and I really do not wish to enter into that debate, because here we are interested more in the application of longitudinal thinking to decision making and problem solving, and to that extent everything has to be a value input to enhanced decision making processes. Therefore, to conclude, there are phases in the development of an organization. An organization is born, it grows and reaches some sort of a peak, then there may be decline, and again there may be a revival leading to crests and troughs, and this is a theory which has been shared with you in the past. For this moment, you need to realize that just as there is a product cycle, there is an organizational cycle. So, before you start your intervention in an organization, you need to ask what phase of growth is the organization at. Is it startup? Is it stable? Is it undergoing an entropy? What are the likelihoods of its revival, or has it plateaued? If it has plateaued, then the choices may be different. Let me give you an example. There are product oriented organizations and there are purpose oriented organizations. The product oriented organizations lead to a situation where the organization has been created to produce a product. So, typically Steel Authority of India will not be Steel Authority of India if it no longer produced steel. Why do you need a Steel Authority of India? Well, the logic is simple. Steel is a basic input for any type of construction, for any type of a structure, and is likely to remain so for a period of time which is as of now fairly indeterminate. Therefore, the character of the organization is determined by the product it handles. On the other hand, an organization may be a purpose oriented organization, And if it is a purpose oriented organization, how does it matter whether it is producing steel or it is producing cookies or is producing sewing machines? What people are interested in is return on their investment, and so long as return on the investment is coming, the purpose is being fulfilled and the product is incidental to it. Just as Steel Authority of India is a successful example, there are very many successful examples of purpose oriented organizations, and a classical reference which comes to mind is Toyota. Toyota was born as a textile manufacturing organization. It acquired certain expertise and one might say certain branding on that score. We do not have the time to observe the successive stages through which it passed through, but today Toyota is known as a car manufacturing organization, and a pretty successful one at that, which essentially means that the organization has kept in focus its purpose, and it does not matter what the product is. Hence, the application of longitudinal thinking to organizations has a twin advantage. It unscrambles the nature of the organization, it establishes its genre, its grain, its DNA, if I might say so, and therefore, from the developmental intervention choices, that choice is exercised which is most prone to keeping the character of the organization intact and yet making it development prone, and that is where longitudinal thinking helps. To put it simply, therefore, longitudinal thinking helps establish a relationship between the present and the past. And since past lives in the present and the present is the harbinger of the future, the past, present and future are segments of time which have no real significance other than understanding it in terms of the actions which need to be taken today and in terms of the values which need to be added to existence itself for better preparing for the future. Therefore, longitudinal thinking is a law of life. That can be converted into simple managerial terms by the statement of a proposition that longitudinal thinking is a process for identifying and understanding the givens. And anyone who has faced life in the raw, and everyone faces life in the raw, a straight borrowing from Somerset Maugham, realizes that one of the most difficult acts of life is to understand the present. Longitudinal thinking therefore becomes an instrument for understanding the present in all its incarnations. The incarnation of the individual, the incarnation of groups incarnation of organized systems like corporates, and therefore, its worth in designing an action plan is not only self evident, but very integral of any management decision making. When this is put in a scientific language, it requires establishing correlation between the independent and the dependent variables in an organization, and the identification of the interdependence of the independent and the dependent variables, and the resolution of that equation will show the way forward, and that is the essence of organization development. But that is another story. Understanding the strength of longitudinal thinking is understanding a basic strength of management thought, and therefore, is an important indicator for the way forward.